Welcome to the Seven Figure Leap podcast. I am so excited to share this episode with Dr. Travis Parry. So Dr. Travis and I hopped on a session for our Pod Profit Summit, and it just blew my mind, honestly. I knew he was an expert in balancing family and wealth creation and growth. He's a father of 8, married 20 years. So definitely someone who shares my value system. But as we got into this episode, what I realized is he's actually a genius at thought leadership. And just, I think as the best thought leaders do, he's got an amazingly powerful and simple framework for getting your ideas out there and growing your business as a result. And he talks a lot about podcast guesting and some really fun, unique, and effective ways to use that to grow your business and to expand your thought leadership. So another case that I had to have this on the podcast in addition to having it as one of our sessions in the summit. So if you love this content, make sure you're going to podprofitssummit.com. Grab your free ticket to our summit while that's available. You do not want to miss the other 30 plus amazing speakers, as well as a deeper dive with Dr. Travis Parry. So enjoy this amazing episode, this amazing interview, this content with my friend, Dr. Travis Parry. And let me know your actionable takeaways. I think you're really, really going to love this. And I can't wait to see you also at the summit.
You're listening to the Seven Figure Leap podcast. We're here to leverage rich relationships and smart strategies to take your business to the next level. Here's your host, Dustin Riekman.
Welcome back to the Pod Profit Summit. I am joined by another amazing speaker, Dr. Travis Parry. I would say has become a friend in recent months and someone I really admire and respect. And he's written multiple books. I'll get into his bio here in a minute. Key to anyone listening to this, he is a very successful podcaster. He's done a ton of podcast guesting. We're going to talk more on the entrepreneurial spirit today and about how to balance that with home life and quality of life. I think that's something that's really important. And I'm sure we'll get into some marketing and business tactics along the way because, that's what we do. But to give you a little more context, so Dr. Travis Parry is the author of 2 #1 best-selling books, Achieving Balance, and his latest book, Marry and Grow Rich. He has a PhD in family relations and human development. He has lots of business accolades, a top 25 podcast of his own. And what I think is the best part of his bio that I wanted to highlight is he has been married for 22 years to his wife, and they have 8 amazing children together. So lots of business lessons here, lots of life lessons. I'm excited to learn from Travis myself. So Travis, thanks so much for being here. I know we're going to unpack how to 10x your business and achieve your money goals without falling into a workaholic trap. And I know I can relate to, to some of the stuff we're going to talk about. So I want to turn it over to you, man, and
Sure.
let you kind of lead us here and where we should start with this conversation.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. Yeah, I began as an entrepreneur wanting to just make life better for anyone, right? Just for me, it was in the financial space. That's where I kind of stepped into as a financial advisor. And I started to see that couples that I was meeting with, especially business owners, were really struggling with time, and they were struggling with how they relate with each other about money.
Yeah.
And so I started to get, interested in these topics because they affected me too. I was like, well, how can I teach this? How can I help my clients if I'm, struggling with it on my own? And so I went after it, hence the master's and the PhD and, the additional learning. I love learning, and learning is great. But what is it for? Well, how can you apply this? I always wanted to write a book about what I learned. And before I released my book, I was like, whoa, wait a minute. I'm going to start a podcast. I think a podcast would be awesome. I had a really good, now a good friend of mine who said, you should start a podcast tomorrow. And like a tree, the best time to plant is last year. And the second best time is tomorrow. Like, so get on it, get today or tomorrow, start that. So I did. The problem was, it took so much time, took so much effort just to try to get the information out there. And I had so much in my brain, like, how do I unpack all this stuff? And so I actually found getting on others' podcasts first was a much better way to go. So I'm going to plug that early on that if you're interested in podcasting, the best way to get started is to be a guest. Go be a guest. Be a guest 100 times, 1,000 times. Like, wear it out. But most podcasts hosts want to talk about something specific. They want to know what am I going to talk to Travis about? What am I going to talk to Dustin about? So, in my opinion, having a book to talk about it is one of the best things you can do. Why? Because we're entrepreneurs, we're ADD, we're ADHD, and it's okay. Some people call it a superpower. Some people look at it as a crutch and, how to help. And I can see how it can work both ways, regardless of what it is. We are constantly bombarded with other ideas and things. Having a book, having something to focus us, allows us that when we're on a show like yours, Dustin, people can ask me about it. So tell me about your book. Why did you write it? What are you doing? And I'm going to show you guys how having a book actually would make you a better podcast guest.
Awesome. That's great. Yeah, there's so much we could talk about. And I was actually on Travis's podcast. We talked a lot about podcast guesting. So, this is awesome. It's actually super timely. He doesn't even know this. I have a draft. I'm calling it kind of a mini book. It's like a book. It's not the book, but it is a book I'm looking to release earlier this year, actually, on podcast guesting and some of the things that I've learned and some of the work we've done with clients. And so I'll just say 1,000% agree with you. And it's been top of mind for a while. And so I'm really excited to have this conversation. This feels a bit organic and ordained. I guess it's like, hey, I need to hear this. And I know the audience will gain a lot. So yeah. So tell us why. So podcast guesting first, obviously you're a host too. So you see the benefits of that. You've got 2 books. You got the physical one you're able to hold up there for the camera. So why is that so important? And where do you want to go from there? You want to unpack how to find the idea and all that sort of thing?
Yeah. So here's my thing. Here's the premise of my new book, Marry and Grow Rich. The premise is business owners want 2 things. Well, probably 2 things. They want time freedom. They want financial freedom. And they want to be able to help people because that's what they do. We solve problems, right?
Yeah.
So along the way, if we're trying to solve a problem, because we're a business owner, we're entrepreneurs, we're trying to solve problems for our clients. If we get in our own way and we are not able to have enough time to do everything, right? Then we actually become slave to our own self. Michael Gerber, the author of The E-Myth Revisited, one of my favorite books, he often says, and I paraphrase, that, just because we're a business owner doesn't mean we actually own the business. A lot of times we are working for a horrible boss, and that boss is me, right?
Yes.
It's you. It's ourselves. And so we tend to overwork. We work 70, 80, 90 hours a week, and we think, well, we're helping our clients. We're just doing the thing, and we're making a difference in the world. All the while, our spouse is going, hey, honey, when do I get time with you? And your kids are nagging at your pant legs like, Dad, can we go play? So when my father passed away at 49, 2 weeks from his 50th birthday, I had a harsh reality set in. And that harsh reality was I was 25 and my dad was essentially 50. We were going down there to surprise him. We were going to do a surprise birthday. We were going to invite all of his friends. Instead, we had a funeral. And it really knocked me off my horse. And I was like, man, what if I only had 25 more years to live, Dustin? What if I only made it to 50? Now, my dad was a great example of living his life with purpose and intention, and was a great dad, father, husband, all the things that people, there was 1,000+ people at his funeral, standing room only. But when I gave a speech at his funeral, it really hit me hard that I want to make a difference, but I don't want to die at 50. So this is a harsh reality a lot of business owners face, and especially males who don't deal with stress very well, who don't talk about it, who don't go to therapy, who don't treat it well. Even if they have a heart attack, they just keep going. Literally, I found out after my dad had passed away that a year before or ish that he had probably suffered a heart attack and never got it checked out. And his dad did the exact same. When my grandpa went to the hospital to get it checked out, they wouldn't let him home. They did a quadruple bypass and said, you're not leaving until we do the surgery because you might not make it. So
Wow.
it's incredible. And there's a risk here, right? For all of us, that internal stress. So the reason I bring this up is because this new book, Marry and Grow Rich, is not about how to get rich quick and how to do all these things and how to blow up your business. It's about how to have a life and stay married and have a solid family and still believe in God and still be a good person to your neighbors and community and all the things while you're growing a business that's wildly successful. The key and the major point here, there's two main points. One is your spouse is the dictator of your success. Not meaning like she's going to come in and say, this is how successful you're going to be. Meaning if you support her and her goals and dreams, she will support you in your goals and dreams. The two of you make it. That's what I did the research on. That was my stinking PhD. I spent 6 years in academia to uncover the main topic that everybody doesn't really want to talk about. They want to talk about fights. They want to talk about divorce. They want to talk about all these things. But nobody really wants to talk about what's making marriage work. What's actually keeping people together. And it's supporting each other. It's your goals. So now if you take money, and if money is the support feature, money is actually what connects you and your spouse together with your business, because you bring in the business piece to it and it complicates everything. So this book isn't a book on just how to communicate with your spouse about money. There's thousands of those.
Yeah.
This is, as an entrepreneur, how do you support each other? What does the research say? How do you actually accomplish this? But what about growing the business, Travis? Great question. First off, we have to know that balance is the key to greater growth. Because if you go out there and I've interviewed, trust me, thousands of business owners. Well, literally, we interviewed about 1,500 for these first two books. And there was one guy, Gary Cardone. You can look him up on our YouTube and my own podcast, Balanced Growth Show. Gary Cardone is the brother of Grant Cardone.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, there can't be that many Cardones running around out there
not
on the
too many.
podcast circuit. So.
No. And so I got interesting insight into their, growing up and what they dealt with. And yes, they had some serious setbacks, but you have psychologists love case studies of twins. And I can't remember if they're twins. Yeah, they're twins. They're twins. So you got this case study of Grant, who has a wife that grounds him. I don't think he's really, incredibly balanced, but he's better than if he was single. Because Mr. Gary Cardone, which I love and respect, and if he's listening to this, awesome, you're an amazing human. But he admitted on air that his divorces, his lack of family was because he's been a workaholic his whole life. Okay. So you kind of can choose your path. Like, do you want a good family life? Do you want a stable, an enjoyable life? You're in business to support your family, right? So if that's not there when you come home, it's likely because you worked yourself out of that relationship. So that's number one. Two, well, then how do you grow? All right. So 2020 comes around. I'm a speaker. I'm a coach. Most of my clients are from the stage. I figured out how to work the stage and how to get clients who are interested in what I have to offer. I could come into an audience of 100 and go, all right, 30 people are going to be interested. 10 of them will actually jump on a call of those 30, and maybe 3 to 5 will take, up on a coaching, a relationship pretty soon. And the others, they'll stay connected, and maybe later on they'll connect with me. Okay.
Yep.
So that all collapsed with COVID, the year of toilet paper, right? When we were standing in line for toilet paper. And I had to figure out, what else am I going to do? This is actually when I started my podcast. I was like, well, I'm going to share my knowledge. I'm going to get out there and do these things. If I want to do this forever, I want to be a thought leader. Okay. And quite honestly, this is how you grow. You become a thought leader.
Got it.
Okay. So, and I'm going to explain how, but I'm going to give the why. The why behind it is, people want to hire the person that they connect with, and they connect with thought leaders because they're seen. All right. Yes, you can work on referrals. You can create a small business with referrals, but you can't ever really 10x. You can't really grow. You can't really expand or a leap without creating something that's beyond you. Yes, there's a lot of solopreneurs that are doing great, and they can do multiple six figures. And I know I've been there with a little bit of help. But in that year, when I decided to do the podcast, when I decided to do everything else, the podcast actually became overwhelming to me. And I actually had to shut it down. I had to pause it. It's like, whoa, this is taking too much time. And I wasn't bringing clients in. I didn't understand. I was like, suppose that, everybody's doing it. Thought leaders are doing it. What's going on? Well, I had my book actually written. And I was like, well, let's try a book. I was trying everything this year. Like, why not? Like, it can't hurt, right? It's 2020. Like, what's going to happen?
I'm leaving the house anyway. You might as well and start a podcast.
Might as well. So I had this goal to write a book, and I had been sitting on it for 10 years. I did a master's, I did a PhD, all to have just more and more confidence to write it. I was way overqualified to write this book by the time I got there. And I think most people, they have a book in them, and it doesn't have to be a book that facilitates the entire world. If you have a service-based business, if you're a coach, you're a real estate agent, you are a financial planner, anything that has clients, write a book for your ideal client. Don't write it to be a New York Times bestseller. That's the biggest mistake.
Yeah.
So when I got out there, I was like, okay, what can I do? Well, I had a manuscript, so I went searching around, like, how do I get it published? And there's about 1 billion different ways to get published these days.
Mm-hmm.
And there's, you go to a publisher and you can wait, 2 to 3 years to get your book done. You can do a hybrid and get some help. You can self-publish or something in between. And I kind of went after the in between, and I got some help trying to figure this out. What's amazing is I spent about 1.5 years marketing my own book before I actually ever published the thing. It was March 2020 when I said, hey guys, I'm going to write a book. It's my 40th birthday. COVID just shut everything down. I'm going to write a book. If you're interested, I would love to get your insights on it. And what happened is people would contact me like, hey, I'd love to know about your book. I'd love to be interviewed. I started interviewing people. I got clients organically just by saying, hey, I'm writing a book. And I started to get people coming in and asking me questions about it. And I had a formal interview process. Eventually it became, my sales process. No ads, 100% organic. In 2020, me, myself, and I, and a part-time assistant, we did over $250,000 in sales. That was when my brain just exploded. I was like, if I can do this, like, imagine when the book gets done, and if I can do this again, one of the biggest reasons why that happened is because I had people in the industry. This was for financial planners, this first book, who came to me and said, Travis, I've got a podcast. We've got a following of about 50,000 on our blog. We'd love to have you, be a guest talking about your book. It's like, yes. So, I would jump on these podcasts, big or small, it didn't matter.
Yeah.
Get the reps in, big or small. And I would just talk about the book. And I learned that there were 3 things that you should talk about. Number 1, why did you write the book? And I would talk about, well, who it's for and why they need it and why it's so important. 2, what's your framework to help solve the problem that this is for? Don't give every single detail. Just give the framework.
Yep.
And then 3, and in that framework, give them the most important thing about the framework. One thing. Because if that one thing can knock over everything else, like that one domino, then people actually trust you. They're like, oh, okay, that actually makes a ton of sense. And they actually make a mental shift from, I held this long held belief about something, and now I can see how that shifted. Now they want some ways to test it. So you give them 1, 2, 3 things. And the podcast guests, just expect this. Well, tell me something that's concrete. How can people actually try this, right? Hosts do this. Really good hosts will do this every single time. I've done dozens of interviews, and this is what they ask. So save those for the end. And of course, if they ask in a different order, tell them in whatever order it comes out. But tend to follow that formula. And by the end, you can say, yeah, do this, this, and this. And at the very end, I will usually plug my book, and then people on the podcast will buy my book. On one podcast, there was an exceptional podcast, Dustin, where, again, there's 50,000 downloads per episode on average. I received so much inbound calls, so many messages, LinkedIn requests off of that one show. We did over $100,000 of business from one podcast guest.
Okay. And what was so to make sure I captured it. So basically the outline, the three things the host is going to want to know about if you're the guest and you have a book, why you wrote the book, an overview of your framework, and then some practical application.
Yeah. Two or three things. Yeah.
And then with that one amazing unicorn podcast that's 100K in revenue, what was your call to action? Is it always the same call to action? Was it just like get the book? How are people finding you to book these calls and get in your LinkedIn DMs?
Yeah. So, we have so much out there. Like, here's my speaker website. Here's my coaching website. And here's my LinkedIn, or here's my link that has everything. Oh my gosh. Overwhelm. What people want is tell me something simple.
Yes.
Right. When I go into a restaurant, it's like, okay, if it's a new restaurant, I look at the menu. I'm like, overwhelm. Right. So what do I tend to do? Well, what do I usually like to eat at this kind of restaurant? Right. It narrows it down. Okay, what am I in the mood for today? And then I may even ask the waiter or the waitress, like, hey, what's good of these? Or what's good anyway here? And they'll help me narrow it down, right? So what people are listening to on podcasts is, hey, I want you to help me with this X problem. How do you solve it? Last thing you want them to do is like send them off into the world of who knows where. Find me on LinkedIn, find me on... No. Go to marryandgrowrichbook.com. Download the book, and you're going to get exactly in chapter 8 what I'm talking about here, right? Boom. So, if you're listening, go do that. Go get the book.
Absolutely.
Just pay shipping. I'll send you the paperback. You get the ebook. You get the audiobook for free. I throw out a bunch of other bonuses. You're not going to get this better on Amazon. Amazon's going to cost you.
And chapter 8, just to specify, is on thought leadership. So
it is.
Marry and Grow Rich as a whole, especially if you're married, you want to grow rich, you should get the book. But if you're into what Travis is sharing here about, which I love, is just like the simplification of thought leadership. Like, what does it mean and how do you actually do it? Chapter 8 is the full summary of that. So that's exactly. It was. I know it was a demonstration, but it's also like you should really go get the book.
No, do it.
Open chapter 8 at a minimum. So
no, I agree, and that's the point. Is what's crazy, Dustin, is that when we have a book and we go on a show, even if the book isn't written, who cares? Have those 3 concepts. I guarantee you, if you're some service provider, chiropractor, therapist, financial planner, it does not matter. You have an ideal client. You solve a problem. You have a framework, and there's some things you can tell them to do right away. Tell that story in whatever form it comes out. Typically, I tell it, chronologically if I can, because it keeps me focused. Otherwise, I get off track.
Yeah.
So how you grow is you have to get out of this business of being in the business. I call it getting off the field. In my analogy in chapter 8 of this book is a playing field, a soccer field. You can call it a football field. I don't really care. Basketball, whatever. You have offense and defense. In the world of business, you have sales and marketing as offense. And you have on defense, you have fulfillment and operations. Everything is under those 2, offense or defense. Both are equal. There's no such thing as a great team without a good defense. Ask the NBA players, they struggle, right? And if you have a horrible offense and a great defense, you're going to tie. That's as good as you can get. So you have to have both. The problem is most business
Cincinnati Bengals. So the NFL, I just have to throw that in there.
There you go.
Bengals fans, they had the world's best offense. Yes. And they had almost the world's worst defense. They didn't even make the playoffs. Right? So
so frustrating.
Yeah.
So frustrating. Yeah. Don't get me started. So the problem is most business owners don't really own the business. It's back to Michael Gerber. They don't actually really own a business. If you're in the business more than you are working on the business, yes, you might technically own the business for the IRS purposes, but you're running around on the playing field. So what I suggest you do is at least be a captain. Figure out where you work best on the playing field. Delegate everything else. If you're the best sales guy, go be sales. Offload marketing, delegate the fulfillment, and hire for ops, right? Do all those things. There's a million different ways. We're not going to get into that today, but that's step one. Step two is that, if you can at least, eventually grow the business so much so that you can become the coach of the team, i.e. the C-suite, become the CEO. That's the thought leader for the business. The thought leader is the one who gets all the attention, grabs, all the interviews. And the best way to do that, quite honestly, is a book so that it can lead to podcast guesting and be on stage. It's those three. Okay. And again, I made the mistake of starting a podcast, being overwhelmed. Now, after about 2 or 3 dozen podcast guesting, I was like, oh, I got the hang of this. Now I know how to do this. And then I offloaded all the production of the podcast to someone else. And a quick sidetrack, so I'm coming back. Quick sidetrack was that I trained my team how to find great potential guests. And those potential guests, a large portion of them, I either did business with, they did business with me, or we did some kind of joint venture, like exactly what we're doing right now, Dustin.
Yeah.
Like, this is the perfect way to network. But I would say don't start the podcast until you've been out there and you've been a guest at least a few dozen times. And then don't take the whole production on yourself. It's just not worth your time unless that is what you do on the playing field. If you're a podcast producer, I would even say have your team do it, right? Don't do it yourself. But even then, like, that's your job. Know where you do really well. Try to become the captain. Get off the field as soon as you can with thought leadership. And eventually, you can work yourself out of the business so much you can sell it or it becomes an asset. In chapter 8, we also talk about, we use Elon Musk's example of you can asset stack or business stack other businesses. But don't get caught up in doing 3 or 4 different things all along this way. Do one, do it really good. And when you get to that point where you can now sell it or give it to the next generation or use it as an asset to grow other businesses or start other businesses, then do that. So anyway, what I really want to...
I just want to say, I like that analogy. I don't think I've heard that one before, but just talking about a football field, we all pretty much start as some position player. Maybe we're playing both ways. We're actually all 22 or whatever, at once. But then eventually you get specialized where you're like, hey, I'm like the best running back. And then probably there's a period where you're like a player coach where you're like, I am playing and I'm coaching. Like I am the CEO and I'm still fulfilling an important role on the field. Then kind of this magical point happens where you become the coach, you become the CEO. You're actually able to stay on the sideline and see the bigger picture and direct and put people in when they need help. And that's kind of, maybe that's where you and I both are. But like, I feel like that seems like where most of my clients want to be. But then there is this next level where you're up in the, you're Jerry Jones in the suite and you're actually the owner.
That's right.
And you hire the coaches.
Yes.
And you can observe from way above in the best spot. And eventually you could sell it. You can take a loan against it. You can use it to spin off memorabilia, whatever. That's an analogy that really lands with me of
Thanks,
that gets outside of the traditional baggage that comes with some of these titles in business. So I like that.
Yeah. And here's the thing here. So how do you do this? How is it practical? So I've just given you kind of the why. There was the framework of how you grow. Okay. But you do it in balance, meaning you create boundaries, you get the support of your spouse. So I wrote Achieving Balance as here's the time management framework book, but it's really more than that. It's about priorities and values. This is really about balance, keeping you grounded psychologically more than, an equilibrium of time. When I would go on podcasts, I would talk about work-life balance is a myth. It doesn't exist. But balance does. So a lot of people are like, oh, balance doesn't exist. I'm like, no. Balance exists. It's a psychological feeling, though. And that's what we have to kind of re-emphasize. That was the domino here. For this book, Marry and Grow Rich, this is all about, well, now, how do you and your spouse stay supportive so you don't fall back off the wagon, become a workaholic again, and lose it as you're growing your business? And what I found is, as we interviewed over 1,500 people for this one, is that business owners who had the greatest balance and the greatest growth knew that their spouse would need to be the most supportive. So that kind of goes back to the first thing. But two, they were also the thought leader. They used a book, they were on stages, and they were on a podcast. So what can you do? Right away, one of the best things you can do is just write down those three things. Who do I serve? What's my ideal client? What do I do to help them? How can I help transform their life, right? What's my basic framework? And what's the most important thing about that? Okay. How, and that's what you want to, talk about on podcasts. And then, be able to say, here's my 1, 2, 3 things that I can do right away. Okay. So write that down and then tell the world that you're going to write a book. I don't care if it's in 10 years. You could write a book sometime. You can do all this research and you can test it out.
I'm working on a book. Yeah.
I'm working on a book. Why not? You never know what that's going to lead. Be intentional about it though, because when I wrote both of these books, each one only took me about 3 to 4 weeks max to actually write, because my system is you speak it out, you transcribe everything, use AI to help you write it like a human, not to ruin your voice.
Sure.
And then you have an actual human team that edits it and formats it and publishes it for you. Don't do that yourself. Don't learn all those things yourself. Like, that is ridiculous. Don't ever do that. Unless you are, again, a writer or publisher. And even then, only do what you need to do. So if you can do those things, really just have an idea, this will allow you to reach out to people and say, hey, I see that you serve my same population. And, for me, it's Christian business owners who are married and have kids age 35 to 55 who are in the United States, who speak English and have a service-based business. I know exactly who my ideal client is. That's my demographic.
Yeah.
The psychographic is they're good people. They're A types who are humble though. They're go-getters, but they also know that they need help. I'm not in the business of helping, those who just want to push and drive me. That drives me nuts. Okay. But I'm here to serve and help and coach. That's what I do. So I know where my ideal client is, and I know how to help them. So write that down, figure out who that is for you, and then reach out to those who would be considered COIs, centers of influence. Podcast hosts are always looking for guests, always. And if you reach out to them, say, hey, I'm writing a book about this. I'd love to be featured. It's coming out soon, or it's coming out next year, a couple of years, or whatever, whenever it's coming out. Doesn't really matter, but reach out to them and say, hey, this is my demographic too. I'm a thought leader. I'm writing this book. I'd love to be on your podcast. Great. Eventually, after you've been on enough shows, you create your own show. Then you can even say, hey, I'd love to podcast swap with you. I've got an audience. You have an audience. We serve the same. It's so brilliant. And eventually you can create, I use LinkedIn. I get on Sales Navigator and have my team reach out to people who would look like be good guests. They come on the show and I ask them about the same things that they're struggling with. Tell me the things you're struggling with balance, with growing while you're trying to keep your balance. And some afterwards go like, Travis, I actually need help with this. Great. Come on in. If it makes sense, I can help you. And then what I do, Dustin, is I actually give 3 sessions as what I call a mini challenge for free. It allows me to see, do I like working with them? Do they like working with me? No hard sales. I used to charge $2,500 for that. And it was great. It was good cash flow. But I found a lot of clients at the end are like, if I don't give them a good runway and we can't test it, sometimes it's not the best fit. And I only want the best fit. Yep. So that's how we're doing it. And that's how we're growing. And quite honestly, we've 10x several years in a row using this method, and then you can scale it out. But your first 100,000, man, it makes a ton of sense. Write a book, or say you're going to write it, put it out there, get on podcasts, and then people will have you start speaking on their stages. And you can speak on your own stages. You can create your own events when you get big enough. Like, hey, now I've got 5,000 followers on whatever. Come and join me for this event. Come and join me for this. You're doing this summit. This is a perfect example.
Yes.
Right? You're head nodding on all this because you're involving COIs. You're getting people on your own event. You're doing this. So I call it page to stage to microphone. And that's how you continue to do this. I do it for 2 or 3 years for each book. And then I start a new book. And that new book gets me on more podcasts, gets me on more stages. It keeps growing. It never ends. So don't think of it as just a book or just a podcast or just speaking on stage, but think of it as thought leadership. And here's the last thing I'll leave them with. So here's some insight real quick. In the book, you've already got the why and who it's for. Then you have the framework and the most important piece. Then you have the takeaways. Okay. You transform that knowledge into a stage. You can take this book and now it's a 45-minute, 60-minute keynote because that's exactly what people want to hear. Why is this relevant? Otherwise, they leave. They check out. Okay. If it's not relevant, bye. Okay. Even if you're funny, doesn't matter. It only catches attention for a little bit. Then they want to know a framework. And if you give them too much, you overwhelm them on stage. You just give them the thing that's most important of that framework and you convince them. And then you give them the takeaways at the end. And you say, by the way, you want to get my book because it has all the other details. And so they do that, right? Well, that'll get you on podcasts and do the same thing, get my book. And then the book will get you speaking. It all works together. So that said, this 1, 2, 3 formula will get you on stages, but then you can turn into podcast guesting, use that same formula when you're guesting. And you can turn it around and ask people those questions when they're on your show as you're the host and they potentially become clients. So I love doing this. I hope, open to any questions on that, Dustin. I know I've given a lot of info, but hopefully that's been really helpful and impactful.
Extremely. And yeah, man, I'm just like observing this as you're teaching. And like one of the things I really admire is you've obviously done this so much for yourself and you've helped clients with it. It's like you can, I don't even know if I'm saying this the right way, like the left hand, right hand, right? Like in the left hand, it's like, hey, marriage, family, balance, like these more like what I expected, more of the soft conversation about, how to do financial management, talk to your wife. And then on the right hand, the things we typically talk about, marketing, sales, funnels. And you're so effortless in talking about both at once and shifting from one to the other because in your mind and what I've grown to appreciate in this conversation, they are attached to the same body, right? Like chapter 8 of your book is thought leadership. So your book's not like the entrepreneur's Bible on how to be a thought leader, but like it is a key chapter because your core belief and what you found in your research is the way to have balance and have a great relationship with your spouse and kids is to position yourself as an entrepreneur, as a thought leader. And I guess that's what I'm just admiring and observing is like, these are all part of the same equation. And we talk about them so disparately that we typically think of someone's an expert in this part and someone's an expert in this part. And Travis is truly an expert at both and how they fit together. And you've demonstrated that by the way you've taught. So thank you. That was like super insightful for me. I love that. I don't have any like specific questions. I feel like I may muddy the water, but I will ask one at the risk of doing that.
It's okay.
Because I think I know some of this and knowing you a little deeper than the audience does yet. But if you're a thought leader and you did what you said, which was so well put, which is I love the page to stage to microphone. So you've got this lead generation through writing a book and doing podcast guesting, and then eventually getting on stages from that. And I know you've got an amazing book and that's going to be your call to action. You have to give your own specifics, but in the way you see the world and how this works, how do you get people from getting the book to actually paying you a substantial amount of money, let's say as a coach?
Yeah.
So I feel like that's a gap that a lot of people are like, well, if I write a book, how do I actually get like money in my bank account other than the 10 or 15 bucks for the book? And I feel like you're really well positioned to give us insight there if you don't mind.
I'm so glad you asked that because that was absolutely a gap that I left out. Okay, I get all excited and I share all these other things, but this is like where the rubber meets the road on this. So what happens is the build up to the book, a lot of it is just book interviews, interviewing people about the book, getting on podcasts, that stuff. Okay, so now you write the book, and in my opinion, you speak the book, you speak it out because you've been talking about it now for 6 months, 9 months, whatever. It's going to come so easy. And some people even say, well, I just do a podcast episode and that becomes a chapter. Yeah, but you still want to clean it up and you still want to transcribe it. So you have all the content. It's already there. what I actually did is I turned these 2 books into courses first. They became courses for my coaching. And so I was able to use the content and just transcribe. It doesn't matter how you do it. If you want to have a course like me, great. If you just want to transcribe it out, awesome. So now the book is finished. Here's a case study, and I'm not too proud to say where I failed. Okay, my first book, guys, writing your first book, you're gonna make mistakes. It's your first book.
Right.
Like, my first kid, like she was an experiment. She would be a parent. Like, what are we doing?
Number 8 was awesome.
Exactly. Yeah. What people don't know about big families, little tangent, is that the older kids, they tend to be great parents to the younger kids. Like it just that's just what happens. Anyway, so my first book, I failed on this one, Dustin. I sold thousands of copies. I really nailed the financial planning industry. This was my niche. I became huge there, and it really became the balance guy for financial advisors. But this became more like a resource book, more like a Bible that nobody reads, blow the dust off. And I think that's the concern. Well, no one's going to read my book because I know what I do. I buy a book and it sits on the shelf. True. So a couple things that I learned about this is don't release every type of the book at once. Release the ebook first. And on Kindle, you can release it for 99 cents and you can get a ton of people to buy the book and get a bestseller. Okay. And, it's a way to get all those people that have been following you through the process to say, I'm going to buy hundreds or thousands of these copies. So now it becomes bestseller on Amazon. This was a bestseller in Germany, Canada, United States, in several different categories. Not basket weaving. It was in work health, in personal development, in time management. It beat out the E-Myth. It beat out Good to Great. It beat out Dave Ramsey. Okay, it was great. Now, that said, has it consistently been a bestseller since then? No, but on that day it was. And I think that's, to be fair, the Amazon bestseller it's an Amazon bestseller. It's not New York Times, but your first book doesn't have to be. And those that do, kudos. That's phenomenal. Either you're an A-list celebrity or I do believe in luck. And luck is when opportunity and, skill meet. And maybe I had a ton of skill and that opportunity, like my viral post a few days ago on LinkedIn, just shot to over 100,000 people. I didn't realize that taxation was such an issue for people. If you haven't seen my viral posts, check me out on LinkedIn. It's quite an interesting concept right now. But the reason I bring that up is I put so much content into this book. I didn't follow the why, here's my basic framework and my main thing. I put all of my content from my course in the book.
Got it.
Okay. Now, this is what happened. A ton of people read it. They gave rave reviews about it. No calls, no emails, no follow-ups. Like, Travis, thanks for the book. I really loved it. It was, oh my goodness. I love the book. Now I have to go reread it. There's so much content. Does that make sense?
I'm posting a book study on your book for the next 6 months. Yes. So.
Yeah. No, that's it. And you will get a system. It's in this book. Now, my second book, I got some coaching on this. I'm like, well, what makes this different? Okay. So here's a case study. This book. And by the way, you still release it ebook, then you go paperback. You can do hardback. You can do audio. I've even seen some people do video. Yeah, I never did that, but kudos to them. Yeah. But I find that ebook should be your very first because you can get it on email. You can send it out. People can go to your website and they can download it. You don't need to put it on Kindle if you don't want to, or KDP. Audiobook is a little bit harder, but after you've written it and you've got some feedback, then you go through and I read the book myself. People connect with my voice. They connect with me emotionally. And so then they're like, when I tell them, hey, you should come and chat with me, they've already felt like they've been talking to me for hours. Okay. So in my second book, not only did we follow the same, drop it a little bit at a time every month, drop a new version, but what we're doing with this book is a little bit different. We're doing the why, and we're just doing the framework. We're not doing everything like we did in Achieving Balance, where I dropped everything. I'm doing the framework and I'm touching on the main pieces. I'm really focusing on that one thing, which is couple development, right? Mm-hmm. couple development is, you need to grow together. You need to develop, especially financially, if you want to grow a business and keep your spouse, right? And achieve financial goals together. You have to be united. Okay. It keeps you balanced, but it also helps you grow and you achieve your goals. It's really a 3-in-1. So that said, with this book, and then having the last 3 or 4 chapters just devoted to, okay, here's step 1, step 2, step 3, go try it. What happens is people go out and then they try it, they read the book. And about 2 or 3 months later, I get an email. Now they're on my subscriber list because they buy it from me, right? I have it on Amazon, by the way. You can get it for $20, or you can buy it from my website for $7.99, $9.99, something like that. You just pay the shipping. So Dustin, it costs me $6 or $7 to send the book out. Okay. Full disclosure, guys, I make $2 off the book. That's not anything, especially when it takes me 5 minutes to do it myself, which I shouldn't do. My assistant should do it. So I'm paying her, $15 an hour, $20 an hour, whatever. So it's costing time, right? So I literally don't make anything off the book.
Yep.
But what some people will do is while they're on my website buying the book, is they might upsell to another training, some coaching, a live event. Okay. And, eventually they may come to those things and become a client later, or, they may spend up to $500 on checkout for all the things because it's so important to them right then. Okay. That's one model. Yep. But the other is with the book itself, I want to give them all of the formats possible when they buy it on my website. I want to give them paperback, ebook, audiobook, because I have not found one format that everybody loves. Some people are like, I only read on a Kindle. I'm like, okay, great. I only listen when I'm working out. Okay. I only like to flip through and touch the pages. All right. Yep. So I have all 3 options. And the idea is that you get it and consume it. I just want them to consume it. So I follow up with emails. How are you doing with this? What's your thoughts and ideas? And once they read through and they get to chapter 7 or 8, that's when people start emailing me. Say, Travis, this was amazing. What do I do now? Okay. And one quick example, I met a sweet lady who her husband is definitely a workaholic and he struggles. He's trying to grow his business. And she's like, can you help me? I'm like, you know what? The best thing you can do is read my book. Because what it's going to do is it'll weed people out who aren't really serious too.
Yeah.
If they don't read it, they're not really serious. They don't really care. Right. Yep. And I could call her husband and be like, hey, your wife said this and you should do like, it's awkward. Right. That doesn't make sense. Referrals can be the same way. Hey, somebody said that, but if you share a book, hey, have you read this book? You should really try this out. The most referable thing out there is a book. Podcasts are getting there, my friend. They are. But still books are number 1. So if they read it and they tend to, do those 2 or 3 things, what they find is, whoa, this is working. I can't believe it. What else does Travis have? Now, what's happened is the rate of people coming in on book number 2 with Marry and Grow Rich is like night and day difference. It's almost 100 times different between balance. Okay. So people in that example I mentioned, the husband and wife situation, they did email me 3 months later. This is amazing. My husband is on board. I didn't have to convince him. He read it. He listened to it. He acknowledged that his wife was right. Like, hey, I should listen to my wife. And then they listened to it. It's like, oh, this is not too bad. We should work together. So they started working with me. And it's that simple. So that's how, you can profit short term if you have, a build out. And I know you do funnels and I know you do, checkouts and carts and upsells and stuff. I really believe that a book is still the best, low ticket offer you can get. You can get a mid ticket. You can get a high ticket offer in there too. It's difficult, but you can still do it. But you can do some upsells and things short term. And you can wait usually about 60 to 90 days when people have consumed it. And then they're like, oh, wow, I really need to reach out. Or they jump on some live event or they come to your training and now they're interested. And what's crazy, and I can't believe I didn't mention this before, Dustin, the book becomes the sales process.
Yes, that's actually what I was going to say. I was like, there's kind of two things that came up for me as you were describing that. One, your surface area of opportunity is very large because you're not just getting their email. You are getting their email and you're getting a transaction and they're getting the book in multiple formats to consume. And like there's all these different, there's a course option. They might in 90 days they've consumed it. Now they're at a different place and they're ready for action. So you're not hitting people at one discrete time. You're actually given a lot more surface area to opportunity when they might be ready to take action. And two, like you just said, the conversion tool, right? Like the book itself is the salesperson and they consume it. They understand. You don't have to teach them why and the framework. And it's like they're coming to you and saying, loved all that. How do I actually take the action step, which is the part that you kind of leave them with at the end of the book? That I kind of capture that. And is that fair the way I
totally, absolutely. And I think that's the piece that was that missing piece. I'm glad you brought that gap up of like, you're going to see some short term and you may even people who are like, yes, I want it now. But the big part that I've learned is if you situate the book correctly, people will try it out and then they'll come and chat with you. It also works for podcast guesting though, because if you give them the right things and they know that the number one thing to your framework actually is what they need, they will try what you tell them to do. So there will be people that listen to this podcast, this episode, and they're like, oh, okay, I am going to write down my why, my framework, and the couple of things I can do. I will say, hey, I'm going to write this book. I will go out there and go after some podcasts. And guess what? As it starts to work, they're going to come to me and say, Travis, I bought your book. I'm listening to your framework. I love your analogy of getting off the field, becoming a business owner. And my spouse and I, we've learned a ton from your book. I haven't even talked about like how you actually get on the same page financially with your spouse. I haven't talked about limiting beliefs and thoughts and problems psychologically. That's all in the book. It's all there. So get the book. Go to marryandgrowrichbook.com, MARRY, spelled out AND, growrichbook.com, and pick up the book. Get the extras. There's like $500 in bonuses just for signing up. You get the ebook, the audio, everything we talked about. And then, yes, just like I talked about, I have a course. You can get the course. You can also jump on our live event and interact with me and get some free coaching. Go check it out. See what you want to do right now. Follow the process. Even if you just funnel hack me, book hack me, podcast hack what I'm doing. I even have my book when I have it on audio. I don't know if you've ever done this, Dustin, but I put my book on audio on my podcast. And that way,
like a chapter is each like a different episode. Yeah.
Yeah. That way, like people who may not even press click, I want the book, they're getting the content if they're on the podcast. And there may be some people who are like, yes, I really love this. And they start to practice it and try it. And then they become clients. So I think you can do it in all these different fashions. Love to help you if this is something where, you want to grow, you want to 10X in 2025, and you want to be able to do this as a thought leader and with your spouse. If you're not married or you don't want to be a thought leader, I understand. This is not your path. But this has worked for so many of my clients and others out there who are doing it. It's just, I love it now. My business, it went from flatline in 2020 to just always growing. I
love it, man. Well, you're extremely generous with just the transparency in which you operate and the way you share. And I'm a huge fan. So Dr. Travis Parry, thank you so much for being just an integral part of what we're doing here at the summit. And this is blew. I mean, I had high expectations, but it blew my expectations away in how tactical and practical this really became. So I love that. So yes, go to marryandgrowrichbook.com. Grab a copy. You can't go wrong. And I guess you kind of gave people the secret too. If you're like, I really want to check out this thought leadership chapter, at the very minimum, you got to go check out Travis's podcast and grab that. And I think it's going to whet your appetite to the point you're like, I need the whole book. This is something that I can learn a lot more from. So any closing thoughts? That was awesome. I really am grateful. I'll leave it to you. Any closing thoughts before we wrap here on this session?
You started with the thing that I am most proud of, and that is married to my wife for 22 years. We have 8 children. I know about family and marriage from experience. I have a PhD in family relations, which is great. That's fine. I learned about other people's families, right? But I've been coaching for 20 years, couples, and this is my my wheelhouse. This is my framework. I don't have an MBA. I've learned the school of hard knocks from being coached. I've had coaches and I've mentors every step of the way. Always have a mentor. I have several right now who I'm paying, some that I'm not paying, and working with them. So if this makes sense, you're going to hear a lot of content through this event. I love it. I love what Dustin's doing. But if this resonates with you, connect with me. Check out the book. I promise you, if you think it's horrible, we'll refund everything. But go give it a shot. And the last thing is that your spouse. If the most important thing that you get from this, yes, there's growth, there's 10xing, but if you're not on the same page with your spouse, this book could be the game changer in your relationship. This is not therapy. This is not how to talk about things with each other. And no, this is how to be on the same page, how to support each other, how to be each other's lifelong and eternal, help meet, as the Bible talks about, right? This is how you do it. This is what I've seen from other couples. I'm not the number one best dad and husband in the world. I'm trying, but I've learned from really great people and research of what it takes. And if you get on the same page, going the same direction, it doesn't matter what you do for marketing and sales and all these other things, you will figure it out. But you'll figure it out together and you'll keep your family and your marriage intact.
Amen. All right. Well, Dr. Travis Parry, again, so grateful for you. Thanks for being here. And I look forward to staying in touch and continuing to learn from you and all the ways that you share to enrich our lives. So thanks again, brother. Appreciate you.
Thanks, Dustin.